The Arizona desert was never truly silent. Even as dusk fell and the last streaks of sunlight burned orange across the horizon, life pulsed beneath the stillness. Cicadas humming, distant coyotes yipping, the faint rush of wind through mesquite. But on State Route 191, the rhythm of traffic had come to a jarring halt. Headlights glowed against the pale dust as cars slowed to a crawl. Some pulled onto the shoulder, others idled in confusion. Drivers leaned out of windows, gesturing, pointing. In the middle of the highway stood a creature no one expected to see so close to the blacktop. A bobcat. Not just any bobcat. A mother, her frame gaunt but muscular, spotted coat dulled with dust, one hind leg dragging slightly as she limped. Her golden eyes shone fierce, not with the instinct to flee, but with an unyielding purpose. She refused to retreat, even as horns blared and tires screeched. "Somebody call animal control!" a man shouted, his voice muffled through the thick desert heat. Instead, dispatch sent Deputy Emily Vargas, a 29-year-old sheriff's deputy known for her steady nerves. She'd handled rattlesnakes under porches, stray cattle blocking intersections, even the occasional mountain lion that strayed too close to town. But nothing in her training prepared her for what she saw that evening. The bobcat did not behave like a frightened wild animal. It wasn't darting away from headlights. Instead, it held its ground. And more strangely, it kept glancing back toward the open desert, pausing, then staring at the line of cars as if waiting for someone to understand. Emily stepped out of her cruiser, the dry heat wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. Her hand rested near her utility belt, more out of habit than threat. She didn't want to harm the animal, but she also couldn't let it cause a dangerous accident. "Easy there, girl," she muttered, voice low. The bobcat's ears twitched. For a moment, their eyes locked, human and wild. Then, with a low, rasping cry, the animal turned its head again toward the darkening desert. Emily frowned. This isn't right. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Vargas. I've got the bobcat in sight. Behavior, unusual. Possible injury to rear leg. Requesting wildlife support." Static crackled before the reply came. "Copy that. 2 to 4. Wildlife biologist en route, Dr. Brooks, ETA 15. The bobcat gave another guttural cry, then limped 3 steps toward the desert scrub. She stopped, looked back at Emily, and waited. The deputy felt a chill despite the heat. This wasn't an animal simply trying to cross the road. It was leading her somewhere. Emily's instincts told her to wait, but her gut whispered something else. She stepped closer to the edge of the asphalt, scanning the scrub where the bobcat lingered. Headlights from impatient drivers painted the animal in beams of white and yellow. The creature's flank rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. Even through the dust, Emily noticed the awkward angle of its back leg, injured, but still determined. Behind her, someone muttered, "Shoot it before it hurts somebody." Emily straightened, her voice sharp. "Nobody's shooting anything." She waved traffic to stay put, then walked slowly toward her cruiser. Within minutes, the logo of Arizona Wildlife Service stenciled across the door. Out stepped Dr. Alan Brooks, a weathered man in his 50s whose reputation stretched across 3 counties. Years under the desert sun had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes carried the alertness of someone who missed nothing. "Evening, Deputy," he said, adjusting his wide-brimmed hat. "Heard we've got ourselves an unusual customer." "You could say that," Emily replied, gesturing toward the bobcat. "She won't leave the road." "Injured leg," and Emily hesitated. "She keeps looking back, almost like she wants us to follow." Dr. Brooks raised his binoculars. Through the lenses, he studied the bobcat's tense posture, the way she shifted her weight, the repeated glances toward the desert. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. "That's maternal behavior if I've ever seen it. She's not protecting herself. She's anxious. Something's out there." Emily tilted her head. "Kittens?" most likely. Brooks lowered the binoculars. This time of year, Young would still be dependent. And if she's hurt, she might be desperate. The bobcat gave another guttural cry, shorter, sharper, then limped several yards toward the darkening scrub. She turned, ears pricked, waiting. Brooks exhaled. "That's not random." Emily glanced at him. "You think she's actually leading us? Animals don't reason like we do, but instinct? Bonding? I've seen mothers do remarkable things for their young." His gaze hardened. If she's come this close to humans, she must be out of options. Emily thought of all the calls she'd handled. Frightened deer, road-killed coyotes, even the feral horses that wandered too close to traffic. None of them had ever asked for help. And yet, here was this limping bobcat, waiting. A decision pressed heavy on her chest. Standard procedure said to contain the animal and wait for backup. But every fiber of her being screamed that waiting meant risking whatever lay beyond that desert brush. She glanced at the gathering crowd of motorists, their cell phones raised, some recording, others whispering nervously. Emily keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Vargas. I'm with Dr. Brooks. Bobcat may have dependent young in distress. We're proceeding on foot into the desert, requesting additional unit for traffic control." "Copy that, 2 to 4. Be advised, sun sets in 20. Exercise caution." Emily clipped the radio back to her vest. "Guess that's us?" Brooks grabbed a small pack from his truck. First aid supplies, water, a flashlight. "Lead the way, deputy." Together they stepped off the asphalt and into the wild. The air changed immediately, cooler, heavier with the scent of creosote and sage. Shadows stretched long as the last light bled from the horizon. The bobcat limped ahead, never more than 30 feet away, pausing often to glance back. Her amber eyes flashed like embers in the dim. Emily scanned the ground as they walked. Then her boot halted mid-step. "Alan, look." In the dust lay tiny paw prints, no bigger than silver dollars, pressed fresh into the sand. Smaller than the mother's, they weaved erratically beside her tracks. But there was something else, heavier impressions. Human boots, large, recent. Brooks crouched, tracing the prints with practiced fingers. His brows knit. "Not good. Someone's been here. Big man, size 11, maybe 12. Depth suggests he was carrying weight." Emily's hand drifted toward her holster. "You think it's a hiker? Or a trapper?" Brooks' voice dropped, grim. "Illegal snares are common out here. That would explain her injury." A chill rippled through Emily. The desert around them seemed suddenly more threatening. Ahead, the bobcat let out a throaty cry, sharper, urgent. Then she limped faster, leading them deeper into the brush. "Deputy," Brooks said, standing, "I think we're about to find what she wanted us to see." And sure enough, 50 yards ahead, the land opened into a clearing. Emily's breath caught as she saw the ground torn apart. Broken boards, a yawning black hole in the desert floor, a collapsed mine shaft. And from its depths came a faint, pitiful sound. The cries of kittens. The sound froze Emily in place. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of desert wind. But once she heard it clearly, she knew. Kittens. The bobcat mother limped to the edge of the collapsed shaft, pacing in tight, frantic circles. She mewed and growled, head lowering into the darkness, then back up again as if pleading. Her tail lashed, restless. Emily stepped cautiously closer, shining her flashlight into the opening. The beam sliced through dust and shadows, revealing jagged rock and splintered timbers. 20 feet down, wedged against a slope of debris, 2 tiny shapes huddled together. Their spotted coats and wide, glinting eyes confirmed it. Bobcat kittens, no more than a few months old. "Oh, God," Emily whispered. "They're alive." Beside her, Brooks swore softly. The little ones must have fallen in when the ground gave way. She can't reach them with that leg. That's why she went to the road. Emily turned to him astonished. "You're saying she came to us on purpose?" Brooks didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the mother bobcat, whose cries grew sharper, more desperate. Finally, he said, "I've studied animals my whole career, Deputy. I've seen loyalty. I've seen fear. But this," he shook his head, "this is something else." Emily leaned closer to the edge, heart hammering. The kittens were moving weakly, their mews echoing up the shaft. If they stayed down there through the cold desert night, their chances of survival shrank by the minute. Her radio crackled. "Unit 2-4. Additional wildlife support is 25 out. Advise." Emily pressed the mic. "Negative on waiting. We've got 2 live juveniles in a collapsed shaft. Immediate action required." "Copy. Proceed with caution, Vargas." She clipped the radio back, turning to Brooks. "We don't have time to wait." Brooks eyed the jagged shaft, measuring the angles. "We'll need rope, harness, and a steady hand." "I've rappelled before," Emily said quickly. "Search and rescue drills. This isn't training, Deputy. Those boards could give way any second." She set her jaw. "Then I'll move fast." For a long moment, Brooks studied her. Then he opened his pack and pulled out a coil of rope. "All right. If we're doing this, we're doing it smart. I'll anchor. You go down with the net. Don't overextend." They worked quickly, securing the rope around a sturdy mesquite trunk. Emily slipped on gloves, tightened her vest straps, and grabbed the collapsible rescue net Brooks handed her. At the shaft's edge, she paused, flashlight clamped between her teeth. The mother bobcat stood just feet away, growling low, tail twitching. Emily expected aggression, a wild predator defending her young, but instead, the animal held her ground. Her golden eyes locked onto Emily's, fierce and pleading, all at once. "I'm going to try," Emily whispered, "but you have to let me." The bobcat gave a rasping sound. Not approval, not trust, but something close enough. Emily descended. The shaft swallowed her instantly. Cool air pressed against her skin, heavy with dust and the faint metallic tang of old ore. Rocks shifted under her boots as she eased downward, the rope creaking softly above. Brooks' voice called from the surface, steady but tense. "Slow. Keep your weight centered. Watch the beams. They're rotted." Emily's flashlight swept the walls. Splintered timbers jutted like broken ribs. At the bottom, the 2 kittens pressed against each other, eyes glowing in the light. One let out a feeble cry that echoed painfully in the cavern. "Almost there," Emily muttered. She braced her boots on a ledge, steadied herself with one hand, and extended the net. The kittens hissed at first, tiny teeth bared, but their movements were sluggish. Carefully, Emily scooped them both into the mesh. They wriggled weakly, but she pulled them close to her chest, securing the net against her vest. "Got them," she called up. "Good. Now don't waste a second. Climb." She planted her boots and began to ascend. Every movement dislodged pebbles and grit, sending them skittering into the shadows below. Halfway up, one of the beams groaned and shifted. The shaft vibrated with a deep, splintering crack. "Move, Deputy!" Brooks shouted. Emily's heart lurched. She heaved herself higher, rope burning through her gloves. The kittens pressed against her chest, their small bodies trembling. Dust rained down as the old timber snapped, crashing into the shaft below. With a final desperate pull, Emily scrambled onto the surface, rolling onto solid ground. She lay there, panting, the net clutched against her. The kittens mewed faintly, alive. Brooks was at her side instantly, steadying her. His relief came in a long exhale. You did it." Emily sat up, opening the net just enough for the mother bobcat to see. The injured cat approached cautiously, body low, eyes blazing. Emily expected hostility, a swipe, a snarl, but instead, the mother pressed her nose to the kittens, chirping softly. They squeaked and wriggled against her, their tiny bodies clinging to her fur. The moment was raw, wordless, and extraordinary. Emily whispered, "She brought us here," because she knew she couldn't do it alone. Brooks, still watching in awe, murmured, "In all my years, I've never seen anything like this." The desert night had fallen in full by the time Emily steadied her breath. Stars blazed across the sky in sharp constellations, the kind only seen miles from any town. The bobcat mother crouched low, shielding her kittens beneath her chest, her tail wrapping them close. For the first time since Emily had arrived on the highway, the animal looked almost calm. Exhausted, yes, but calm. Brooks crouched near the edge of the shaft, his flashlight sweeping over the ground. He froze. "Emily, you'd better look at this." She rose and walked over, boots crunching on the gravel. There, just beyond the unstable timbers, half buried in sand, was a twisted coil of wire. It glinted faintly under the beam. A snare. Emily's throat tightened. She looked back at the mother bobcat and her injured leg. The limp. The wound. It made sense now. "Damn it," she whispered. "Someone's been trapping out here." Brooks nodded grimly, pulling a stick to lift the wire without touching it. Illegal. Nasty work, too. These things don't discriminate. Coyotes, foxes, bobcats, even a dog or a hiker if they stepped wrong. Emily's jaw clenched. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch Vargas, confirming evidence of illegal snares near collapsed shaft off Route 191. Possible poaching activity. Request investigation team on site at first light." "Copy, Vargas. Wildlife enforcement notified. Units will be dispatched." She clipped the radio back, a pulse of anger under her ribs. The bobcat hadn't just been unlucky. She'd been a victim of someone's cruelty, and despite her pain, she'd crossed a highway, risked cars and strangers, just to save her young. Brooks walked to his truck and retrieved a carrier, one meant for large predators. "We need to get her leg treated. Those kittens, too. If infections set in, she won't last long." Emily hesitated. "You think she'll let us?" The mother bobcat's golden eyes glowed in the dark, fixed on them. She hissed softly when Brooks set the carrier down but didn't lunge. "Animals know intent," Brooks said quietly. "And right now, she knows we're not the enemy." They worked slowly, carefully. Emily knelt low, keeping her voice steady, gentle. Brooks extended a pole with a padded loop, not to harm, but to guide. After several tense minutes, the mother stepped back into the carrier, only because the kittens were placed inside first. Emily exhaled in disbelief. She followed them in. Brooks latched the door carefully. Maternal instinct, stronger than fear. He hoisted the carrier into the truck bed, securing it with straps. As they pulled onto the highway, the cluster of cars that had once gathered was long gone. Only the flashing hazard lights of Emily's cruiser remained. She slid into the driver's seat, the desert stretching endlessly around her. For a while, the ride was quiet, the road unspooling under the headlights. Emily found herself glancing at the carrier in the rearview mirror. The bobcat's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, two tiny forms pressed against her belly. "You know," Emily said softly, "when I first saw her on the road, I thought she was just a hazard, something to clear away. But she wasn't trying to stop us. She was begging us to listen." Brooks nodded slowly. "And you did." That made all the difference. They reached the Sonora Wildlife Rehabilitation Center after midnight. Floodlights lit the facility's perimeter, tall fences guarding wide enclosures. Inside, the air smelled faintly of straw and antiseptic. Veterinary staff rushed to meet them, lifting the carrier gently onto a wheeled gurney. The mother bobcat growled low, crouched protectively but didn't lash out. Dr. Martinez, the on-call vet, leaned over. Rear leg injury. Snare wound. Looks nasty. Kitten's dehydrated. Possible heat exhaustion. He looked at Brooks. We'll sedate her just enough to clean the wound and start antibiotics. Brooks nodded. She's strong. She made it this far. Give her a chance. She'll fight. Emily stood back as the team worked. Through the glass window of the treatment room, she watched the bobcat slowly relax under sedation. The kittens were lifted into a padded crate, small mouths opening in weak mews as they were offered water. For the first time all night, Emily felt the adrenaline ebb. Fatigue washed over her. She leaned against the wall, staring through the glass, unable to shake the image of the mother bobcat standing in the middle of the road, refusing to move until someone understood. A nurse approached. You can head home, deputy. We'll take it from here. But Emily shook her head. I'll wait. Hours later, as dawn's first light tinted the desert sky pink, Dr. Martinez stepped into the hallway. He pulled off his gloves with a tired smile. She's stable. Wound was bad, but we cleaned it, stitched it, started antibiotics. Kittens are drinking on their own. They'll need a week of care before we can say for sure, but... He hesitated, then smiled wider. They've got a real shot. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Good, she said softly. That's good. The story didn't stay quiet for long. By the following afternoon, local news trucks parked outside the rehabilitation center. Someone had leaked the details. A bobcat mother leading humans to her trapped kittens, surviving a snare, crossing a highway for help. It was too extraordinary to ignore. Emily found herself cornered by a reporter on her way out of the sheriff's office. Deputy Vargas, is it true a wild bobcat actually led you to her kittens? Do you believe she knew what she was doing? Emily blinked at the cameras, the flashes, the hungry eyes waiting for a soundbite. She thought of the golden eyes on the road, the cries from the shaft, the desperate way the bobcat had looked at her. Finally, she said, all I know is she saved them. And maybe, in her own way, she asked us to help. I couldn't turn away. The quote made headlines the next morning. Deputy says bobcat asked for help and got it. The rehabilitation center buzzed with activity in the days that followed. Staff moved carefully around the new arrivals, the injured mother and her two fragile kittens, their every step watched by curious eyes peering through observation windows. The bobcat, now bandaged and housed in a quiet enclosure, remained fiercely protective. Even sedated for treatment, she growled whenever strangers approached too quickly. But the staff noted something unusual. She tolerated Emily's presence. The first time Emily visited after her shift, she stood quietly at the edge of the enclosure. The mother raised her head, golden eyes narrowing. The kittens mewed and pressed close to her fur. For a long, tense moment, Emily thought the cat would lash out. Instead, the bobcat gave a low, almost resigned chirp, then settled back down, wrapping her tail tighter around her young. She remembers you, Dr. Martinez murmured beside Emily. Animals can recognize intent. You weren't a threat that night. You were part of the rescue. Emily couldn't explain why, but the moment stirred something deep in her chest. She wasn't just a deputy following procedure. She had become, in the bobcat's wary eyes, part of the circle of trust. Meanwhile, the story spread far beyond Arizona. News networks ran segments titled Bobcat Leads Deputy to Rescue and Mother's Instinct Saves Desert Kittens. Social media erupted with photos and shaky cell phone videos from motorists who had been stopped on Route 191. Some clips even showed Emily stepping off the highway, following the limping cat into the scrub. Within a week, donations to the Sonora Wildlife Rehabilitation Center tripled. Families brought their children to learn about bobcats. Wildlife officers were flooded with questions, and schools requested guest talks about desert conservation. For Brooks, the shift was astonishing. "I've been fighting for attention on wildlife issues for 20 years, he told Emily during one visit, "and this cat did more in a week than all my lectures combined." Emily smirked. "Guess people like a good story." "Not just a story," Brooks corrected gently. "A symbol. People want to believe wild animals can trust us, that maybe there's hope for how we share this land." But beneath the celebration, a darker reality simmered. The investigation team found multiple illegal snares scattered across the desert near the collapsed shaft. Tracks suggested at least one individual had been setting them regularly. Though no suspect had been caught yet, the evidence was clear. The bobcat's injury had been no accident. Emily felt her stomach knot every time she thought about it. She shouldn't have had to risk herself like that. If those traps weren't out there. Brooks placed a hand on her shoulder. "What matters is she found the strength to fight. And you listened. That combination saved her family." Still, the knowledge burned. Emily began pushing her department to expand patrols against poachers, arguing that if a bobcat could trust humans enough to seek help, then humans owed them protection in return. Her sergeant eventually relented, giving her unofficial clearance to coordinate with wildlife officers. "You're making me a conservation deputy now?" she joked one evening. "Call it whatever you want," her sergeant replied, gruff but supportive. "But you clearly care, and this county needs someone who does." Back at the rehab center, the kittens thrived. Within 2 weeks, they gained weight, their once wobbly steps turning into playful pounces inside the enclosure. They chased each other in the straw, climbed low logs, and occasionally tumbled in a heap against their mother's side. Emily visited whenever she could. Sometimes she just watched quietly. Other times, under staff supervision, she helped with feedings, using long tongs to place meat through a protected slot. The first time one of the kittens batted at the tongs, she laughed out loud. The sound startled even herself. "You're a natural," Dr. Martinez said. Emily shook her head. "I'm a cop, not a wildlife keeper." "Maybe both," he replied. But Emily wasn't the only one drawn back again and again. Crowds gathered outside the viewing windows daily. Teachers brought classrooms. News crews returned to film updates. The Bobcat family became local celebrities, unofficial ambassadors of the desert. Emily worried what would happen once they recovered. Would they be released far from people, left to vanish back into the wild? Would the bond she felt, fragile as it was, dissolve? Brooks addressed her fears one evening as they stood near the enclosure. "If her leg heals strong, she'll go back. That's what's natural. But sometimes, Deputy, what matters isn't how long we stay in their lives. It's that we showed up when they needed us." Emily nodded, though the ache in her chest lingered. She understood. The desert was their home, not hers to keep. Still, when the mother bobcat lifted her head that night and fixed Emily with those piercing golden eyes, the same eyes that had once stopped traffic on a highway, the connection was undeniable. A silent understanding passed between them. "You saved my family." And for Emily, that was enough. 3 weeks after the rescue, the Bobcat family had transformed. The kittens, once frail and trembling, now bounded across their enclosure with bursts of energy. They stalked each other through tufts of straw, practicing the clumsy art of pouncing. Their mother, her leg wrapped but healing, stretched and tested her weight more each day. The limp was still there but less pronounced. "She's a fighter," Dr. Martinez told Emily during a checkup. "Stitches are holding, muscles rebuilding. Another 2 weeks, and she'll be fit for release." The words struck Emily harder than she expected. Release. It was the goal from the beginning. Freedom, return to the desert where they belonged. But the thought of watching them disappear left her strangely hollow. "What if she can't survive out there?" Emily asked quietly. Martinez shook his head. "She will. Her instincts are sharp. She's proven that. And the kittens, they'll learn from her. That's the way it's meant to be." Emily nodded but didn't answer. Her eyes lingered on the mother's golden stare as the cat pressed her nose gently against one kitten's head. News of the planned release spread quickly. Cameras arrived again, journalists eager to capture the triumphant ending. Headlines buzzed with anticipation. "Highway Bobcat family to return home." Brooks pulled Emily aside the day before the release. "We'll need a secure location, far from highways, away from snare lines. We've scouted a canyon near the Chiricahua Range. Plenty of prey, water, cover." Emily frowned. "And people?" Brooks allowed himself a smile. "Closest house is 20 miles. She'll be free there." Emily exhaled slowly. It sounded perfect. Still, a selfish part of her wished the mother would stay, just a little longer. The morning of the release, Emily joined the wildlife team in the pre-dawn chill. The desert sky was painted in lavender and pale gold. Reporters gathered at a distance, lenses glinting. But the actual work happened quietly, out of sight of the crowd. The Bobcat family was loaded into transport carriers. The kittens mewed softly, confused but unharmed. Their mother pressed against the crate walls, golden eyes blazing but not panicked. Emily rode in the back of the truck beside them, her hand resting lightly on the metal bars. She spoke softly, though she knew the animals didn't need her words. "Almost home, girl. Just a little longer." The drive wound through dirt tracks and rocky terrain until they reached the canyon Brooks had chosen. Towering cliffs cast deep shadows, the ground carpeted with mesquite, cactus, and desert grasses. A stream shimmered faintly in the early light. "This is it," Brooks said, stepping down from the cab. "As good a place as any." The team worked quickly, unloading the carriers and setting them side by side. The cameras and reporters stayed back, hushed. Even the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Emily crouched beside the mother's crate. For a long moment, golden eyes met hers through the bars. There was no snarl, no hiss, only recognition. Brooks nodded to her. "You should do it." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the latch. With a soft click, the door swung open. At first, the mother didn't move. She crouched low, sniffing the desert air. Then, with a sudden fluid motion, she stepped forward. Her bandaged leg touched the ground, firm, steady. The kittens tumbled after her, their small paws padding across the sand. The family paused just a few feet away, the kittens circling their mother's legs. The golden eyes turned back one last time, locking on Emily. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. It wasn't human gratitude. She knew that. It was something older, something wilder. A silent acknowledgement, a bridge of understanding that would never be spoken, but never forgotten. Then, with a flick of her tail, the bobcat melted into the brush. The kittens followed, their spotted coats vanishing into the wild. The desert swallowed them, as if they had never been there at all. Emily stood motionless, the silence around her deafening. The crowd erupted into cheers behind her, reporters rushing to capture the moment, cameras snapping, but she barely heard them. Her gaze lingered on the spot where the bobcats had disappeared. Brooks stepped beside her. "You did good, Deputy." Better than good. Emily swallowed hard. Feels like losing them. Not losing, Brooks corrected gently. Letting them be what they're meant to be. That's the hardest part of helping wildlife. Knowing it isn't ours to keep. Emily exhaled slowly. Deep down, she knew he was right. But still, the ache in her chest remained. That night, long after the release, Emily drove back along Route 191. The highway was quiet, the desert stretching endless on either side. She slowed at mile marker 77, the spot where it had all begun. For a moment, she pulled to the shoulder and stepped out. The air was warm, cicadas humming. She looked out at the desert scrub, half expecting to see golden eyes staring back. But the road was empty. Emily smiled faintly. "You're home now," she whispered into the stillness. "Take care of them." And with that, she climbed back into her cruiser and drove into the night, carrying with her the memory of a mother's silent cry and the extraordinary bond that had changed her forever. Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade. National outlets ran features with headlines like "The Bobcat Who Stopped Traffic" and "Deputy and Desert Mother, an Unlikely Rescue." Wildlife groups used the footage to campaign against illegal snares. Donations to conservation efforts surged. For the Sonora Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, it was a lifeline. New enclosures were built, veterinary staff expanded, and education programs launched. Children visited in droves, wide-eyed as they learned that wild mothers could fight as fiercely for their young as any human. Emily found herself at the center of it all, though she never sought the attention. Reporters requested interviews. Schools invited her to speak. Even the sheriff's office leaned on her newfound reputation, encouraging her to represent the department at community events. At first, she resisted. She was a deputy, not a celebrity. But one evening, as she addressed a group of schoolchildren sitting cross-legged on a gym floor, she realized something. They weren't listening to her because she wore a badge. They were listening because of the bobcat. "Wild animals aren't enemies," she told them, her voice steady. "Sometimes they need us. And sometimes we need them to remind us what matters." The children clapped, some raising their hands with questions about bobcats, others about how to help injured animals. Emily walked away that night with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Brooks, meanwhile, used the case as a springboard for stronger protections. At county meetings, he waved photos of the snare wires and presented data on how many animals suffered silently in the desert. Public support was overwhelming. Within months, new legislation passed, increasing penalties for illegal trapping and funding more patrols. "This is what happens," Brooks said to Emily one afternoon as they left a hearing, "when people see a story instead of a statistic." Emily nodded. They didn't just see a bobcat, they saw a mother, and they understood. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Emily's heart often drifted back to the canyon where the family had been released. She patrolled the desert more often now, sometimes passing near the Chiricahua Range. She never expected to see them again. The wild had reclaimed them. But one evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, she paused her cruiser by a ridge. For no reason she could name, she stepped out and scanned the brush. The desert was still, except for a flicker of movement at the edge of the rocks. A shape, low, graceful, familiar. Her breath caught. The mother bobcat stood half hidden in the shadows, golden eyes gleaming. She was thinner now, lean with survival, her leg still stiff but steady. Behind her, two smaller forms crouched, almost grown, their spotted coats blending into the brush. Emily didn't move. She didn't call out. She simply stood, letting the moment exist. The bobcat stared back for several heartbeats. Then, with a flick of her tail, she vanished into the wild, the kitten slipping after her. Emily's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't ache. It was peace. They had survived, and they belonged where they were. Months later, at the dedication of a new conservation center, Emily stood beside Brooks as officials unveiled a mural painted across the entrance wall. It showed a bobcat mother on a desert highway, kittens at her side, and a human figure watching from the shadows. Above it, the inscription read, "The silent cry that spoke for all." As the crowd applauded, Emily felt something shift deep inside her. She had answered one call that night, a call from the wild, from a mother's desperate cry. And in doing so, she had become part of a story that stretched beyond her, beyond the town, beyond even the desert. The bond would remain forever, unspoken but indelible. A deputy and a bobcat, their paths crossing for one extraordinary moment. A moment that saved lives, changed laws, and reminded everyone who heard the story that the line between human and wild was thinner than they had ever imagined. The desert has a way of swallowing stories. Footprints vanish in hours. Winds erase tracks. Even tragedies, broken snares, collapsed shafts, lost cries are hidden beneath the shifting sands. But some stories linger. Some echo louder than the silence itself. For Deputy Emily Vargas, the memory of that night never dulled. Whenever she patrolled Route 191, she slowed at mile marker 77, her eyes sweeping the roadside as if expecting golden eyes to appear once more. They never did, but she didn't need to see them. She carried them with her, always. In quiet moments, she replayed the sight of the kittens pressed against their mother, the desperate cry that had halted traffic, the trust that had bridged an impossible gap between predator and human. It became less of a memory and more of a compass, guiding her choices, shaping how she viewed the land she served. One autumn evening, months after the release, Emily attended a conservation gala in Phoenix. She hadn't wanted to go. Speeches and spotlights weren't her world, but Brooks insisted. "You need to be there," he told her. "Not for you. For her." So she went. The ballroom was filled with scientists, lawmakers, donors. A slideshow played across a giant screen. Images of desert wildlife, rescue efforts, new legislation. And finally, a photo of the Bobcat family in their enclosure, taken just before release. The crowd applauded, some even rising to their feet. The presenter called Emily to the stage. Reluctantly, she stepped forward, the applause swelling. A plaque was placed in her hands, etched with words she barely heard. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated. She could talk about procedure, about law enforcement, about bravery. But none of it felt true. So instead, she said simply, "I don't think I saved them. I think they saved us. Because for one night they reminded us what it means to listen." The room fell silent. Then the applause returned, stronger than before. After the event, Brooks found her standing outside on the balcony, away from the noise. The city lights glowed below, but her gaze was on the dark horizon. "Still thinking about her?" he asked. "Always," Emily admitted. Brooks smiled faintly. "That's the mark of something real. You'll carry it forever." Emily nodded. "Sometimes I wonder if she remembers me. Or if, to her, I was just another part of the road she crossed." Brooks looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is the moment you shared. That's more than most people ever get." Emily didn't reply. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the desert wind, carried all the way from the plains, brush against her face. The following spring, Emily returned to the Chiricahua Range for patrol. She stopped by a ridge overlooking the canyon where they had released the family months earlier. The land stretched wide and wild, alive with birdsong and the whisper of the stream below. She didn't expect to see them again, and she didn't. But as she stood there, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, rasping cry, the call of a bobcat echoing against the cliffs. Emily's lips curved into a smile. She didn't need proof. She didn't need to see golden eyes in the brush. She knew they were out there, surviving, thriving, living as they were meant to live, and she was at peace. That night, as she drove home along Route 191, the desert stretched endless and eternal around her. She thought of the inscription on the mural at the conservation center, the silent cry that spoke for all. And she realized the truth. That cry had not only saved 2 kittens, it had awakened a community, changed laws, and transformed the way she saw her own duty. The story would live on, not in headlines, not in plaques, but in the quiet bond between human and wild. And in the silence of the desert, under the endless sky, a deputy carried that bond with her, forever.